Check, check, check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Hello. Check, check. Check, check, check.
Hey guys. Hey guys, we might get started in a minute. Come and take a seat, and we'll get going. All right, good evening. Thanks for coming along. What's the verdict on the pizza? Pizza good? Yep. All right, few too many veggies, but that's not the worst thing. No. They were okay though? The veggies were okay. All right. All right, so the pizza story is a funny one because all the pizza shops we've been going to over the years love the fact that we order, 25, 30 pizzas in one go. But this time the pizzas are different, but the pizza delivery guy is the same guy from last time. And he contacted me personally, going, I've changed pizza shops. This would be much better for you. I'll do you a deal. And I'm like, this guy Steve is the guy who's been coming for years. I'm like, all right, let's do it. So it's important to get the feedback, and if it's better, then that's great. We'll probably do the same thing next month with a bit too crusty. I'll put that. No, it seems to be well received. That's good. So welcome. My name's Jesse. If you're not sure who I am, a few faces here tonight that I haven't seen before, and a few people I haven't seen for ages. It's great to see you. Welcome. Thanks for coming along. I'm an iOS developer, and I've been sort of coordinating the beer and pizza. I've known Steve, the pizza guy, since 2014. So. I've got a little intro that I do every month. I think I've ironed out all the spelling mistakes by now. I'll start with our little code of conduct, our upcoming events, tonight's agenda and sponsors, and before we jump into the first presentation, we'll do a who's hiring as well. First thing is our code of conduct. A couple of years ago, we put together a code of conduct for the group, which was a combination of existing groups, Meetup groups, code of conduct with our own additions as well, and that's been really well received. And the TL, not TLDR, don't read, like this is the sort of first paragraph, but pretty much it sums everything up, saying our community is dedicated to providing an inclusive environment, and that includes everything else down here as well. And one of the additions we added was technology choices at the bottom, so we're all inclusive technology choices. I think I've ironed out all the spelling mistakes by now. I've got a little intro that I do every month. A couple of years ago, we put together a code of conduct for the group, which was a combination of existing groups, Meetup groups, code of conduct with our own additions as well, and the one of the additions we added was technology choices at the bottom, so we're all inclusive technology choices. The code of conduct is available on our website, Code of Conduct, and I think I've just added a new route to the application so that the hyphens aren't there as well. If you notice something or you witness something or something happens to you, you can send an email to codeofconduct@melbournecocoaheads.com, and that comes to a small group of us, a sort of diverse group of us that have been involved with CocoaHeads for a number of years. Alternatively, you can just come and speak to me one-on-one if you like. And any emails to this will be taken with the utmost seriousness. CocoaHeads events, we're not just our presentation night, which is tonight. We also have a hack night, which has been widely popular in combination with the Google Developers Group Melbourne. And we have drinks night, and we sort of have NS breakfast. I'm not sure if we're doing that this month, but we'll work it out. I forgot to change the slide. Presentation night is the second Thursday of the month from 6 to 8:30. So there's a logic to it. Pizza and drinks from 6. We have lightning talks and I call main presentation, sort of 10 minutes for a lightning talk, 20 minutes for a larger one. We live stream everything to YouTube, and then when I've got time, I cut them up and I republish them with your name and the topic, and we're nearly at that 200 subscribers mark on YouTube, 180 something at the moment. But there's a back catalogue of presentations, and I'm a few months behind at the moment, but I think for sort of historical sense, it's really cool to have them up there. And we're hosted here at YBF all year as well. Sorry? Yes, you get the benefit of not having to watch the live stream, although I've heard it's pretty good quality. I've never watched the live stream myself. Yes, so that you've been watching over the years, yeah, but now you've come in real life, it's good. Hack night is sort of from 6, but introductions from 6:30. BYO laptop. It's an alcohol-free kind of, we say, all ages event, which is we have had a whole range of ages come along, and it's hosted at Cognizant Digital Business, which is just around down here on William Street. I've got a photo from one of the hack nights last year. It's in combination with the Google Developer Group, and the RSVPs kind of, I think we're nearly at capacity most months now. And yeah, turn up. I think there's normally some little off-side groups doing specific technology instructions and bits and pieces. But yeah, lots of fun. On those events, our next hack night is February 20. It's next week. I do reuse these slides. This was valid last month. Drinks night is the second last Tuesday of the month. I've got a slide at the end that I've updated. Sorry, last Tuesday of the month. Yeah, that's terrible, that one. Sorry. We're at melbournecocoaheads.com, twitter.com, melbournecoco. We have a Slack channel with some pretty lively conversation throughout the week. If you ever got any like random questions, Swift, iOS, all sorts of questions at the moment. JavaScript, not so much, but we are inclusive of those. A lot of people now write JavaScript, I've heard. And yeah, melbournecocoaheads.com/live links to the YouTube channel. We're always looking for volunteers to help out. There's a bit of logistics that goes on every month, but also presenting the main feature, the reason why you're here. Everyone that has ever presented has always been a volunteer. If you'd like to help out, join on Slack, the volunteers channel. It's mainly just discussion about coordinating hack night and double checking that things are happening. CocoaHeads on YouTube, that's just a screenshot from that. Our sponsors for 2019, over the last few months I've been canvassing around asking for, well, actually just speaking to key people to put up some sponsorship, and I've been really successful with that. Our major sponsor for 2019 is Cognizant Digital Business. Is that the right logo? No. All right, there we go. They move very quickly. Cognizant is moving very quickly. That's the logo from last year. But they've generously put up the money for major sponsor for the year, and it's great. They sponsor last year as well as a silver sponsor, and they also run or let us host the hack night there as well. So they're just down the road. There's normally Cognizant team here as well, and maybe you guys are hiring tonight. Yeah, all right, we'll get to that. Our silver sponsors, I'm getting the logos together as we speak, but in alphabetical order we have AppScore. The AppScore team, anyone from the AppScore team here this week? All right. And Domestic Cat Software, which is where I work, and teams here as well tonight. And Itty Bitty Apps, also here. I recognise everyone from Itty Bitty Apps. And Latitude Financial too. So, I mean, everyone that's put the money up is either a company that employs a lot of iOS developers, has been employing them for years, or has been around in Melbourne for ages. It's super great to have the community. I mean, everyone that I've got up there is someone that I've spoken to about it all a lot. It's really exciting. So thanks again to the sponsors. Do you want to just give a little bit of a clap to the sponsors? And the sponsors, you can clap yourself. The money goes literally towards paying for the venue and the pizzas and the drinks and everything else. And it just runs month to month on that. So it's great. Otherwise the beer would be on me every month, which is fun for a while. Our venue is YBF Ventures. That's where we are. We're here all year. We're here last year. It's great to be able to lock them down for the year. I think they're super busy. And again, same as Cognizant, they change logos and everything every 6 months. It's how fast it's all moving. Unfortunately tonight, fortunately tonight we've got some great presentations lined up. But unfortunately, Kevin, who was scheduled, couldn't make it. Due to a scheduling issue, but he'll be here next month, he promised me. So Pablo's up first on custom ViewController presentations, Renault's up second on unit testing memory leaks, and then Baz, I didn't update the slide, but Baz's little presentation does have a title. What was the title, Baz? Something about speeding up your CI. And if I've got 5 minutes between now and the end of Baz talking, I've got some Xcode build stuff I've been fiddling with it's fun. It's changed my CI life as well. And then we'll go to some beers at Irish Times afterwards. Before I get out of the way, we might go around the room and do a quick who's hiring. So the way this works is if you or your company's hiring, you want to just put your hand up, and then I'll go around the room and you can just sort of say who you are, where you're from, and do the spiel. And I'll start with Cognizant Digital Business at the back. Thank you, Jane. Awesome. Great. And thank you guys for sponsoring this month as well, or for the year, not the month. Anyone else? All right, awesome. I will get out of the way and I will set up Pablo's laptop. We'll get started in a few minutes. Good time for a refresher. Cheers. All right, check. Check, 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 check.
okay, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Or it's too close?
Let me just go down a little bit.
Like here?
That's perfect. Yep. And then just in the pocket.
Yeah.
Turn off.
Needs to be, yeah.
I think you can do it from that menu there.
Mirror.
Yep.
Yep. Looking good.
Yep. Cool.
Boom.
All
We're
right.
good. Thank you. All right. Okay. So I'm Pablo Caif, and I'm here to talk to you about custom ViewController presentations and transitions, and a way that I found to try to simplify them. Even I was struggling with trying to find a title that it will summarize everything, and turns out that the ViewController transitions, the custom transitions, are not an easy thing. They are actually quite hard, and not because it's complex to implement it, but more because of the moving parts there are in the implementations themselves. But actually, they have a nice angle to it, which means that for me, they're actually pretty cool. And I find like a whole bunch of nice advantages. They provide a advanced user experience, especially when you find a way of implementing a custom transition that makes sense and takes the user through the flow of how a ViewController is being presented. I think that really makes your app a lot more polished, and it gives a certain sense of quality. Of course, it's important the internal quality, but it's also important the external quality, how it looks. And I think that final touch adds a lot of nice quality to it. And since we got now, most of the devices are actually quite big, have quite big screens, and you got like in the far top left corner, the go back. If you add the interactive transitions, which is like a complementary part of the custom transitions that allows you to connect a gesture recognizer with the presentation and the dismissal, that actually makes much easier to dismiss ViewControllers if you just can swap down. And all this stuff differentiates your app from the rest of the apps in the App Store. So when I started looking into it, I went through all the WWDC videos, Apple Docs, few examples, and I was like really, really confused. So I tried to break it down in pieces to show you how it works, or at least how Apple has defined them. So let's say we want to present a ViewController. If we want that ViewController to be presented with a custom transition, we need to provide a transition delegate. And this delegate will have the job of providing the actual animator, which is, it needs to be a class that adopts the protocol UI ViewController animated transitioning. And through this, we can create the animation. And then once we hand this over to UIKit, UIKit will, let's say you're trying to do like a cover up, like typical model ViewController presentation, right? UIKit will, once you instantiate your ViewController, UIKit will do all the life cycle goals in the view controller, such as view did low, view will appear, view did appear. It will do all the layout and everything. And then it will clone your from view controller, and it will clone your to view controller, and it will create this UI view controller context transitioning object. It will add them there, and it will also add a container view. And then it will add that container view to the window, and it will ask the animator that you have provided to start the animation. The animator can have access to these contexts, and is able to get the source view controller, the from view controller, and you can do something like, for example, you can add the source view controller, and if you're doing a cover up, you can add the destination view controller to the view hierarchy, offset by its height, and then just do an animation that it will just set the frame as the actual final frame. And then once you add that to the animation, UIKit will run that. And once it finishes, it will remove this from the window, and you will end up with the actual destination view controller. If we want to add the interactivity to it, we need to adopt this protocol, which is called UI view controller interactive transitioning. That allows the connection between the gesture recognizer and the progress of the transition of the presentation itself. And by using this, we can tell the context how the animation needs to progress and whether it needs to reverse or not. And if, for example, we're using navigation controllers, UI navigation controller, slightly different, we need to adopt the UI navigation controller delegate. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? I don't think so. The first time I saw this, it was like that. I'm still actually pretty confused. So I started thinking, going through these examples and seeing like cases where people's just adding all the stuff to the view controller, massive view controllers with all the animations, tracking the gestures and stuff like that. And I thought, how can I build this in a way that it works for me? And I had a few goals for it, and I've been trying to improve it with the app, with my own apps and some apps at work. So the first thing I really wanted is for the transitions to be reusable. Which is actually pretty handy. If you come up with a nice transition, it'd be really good to just plug it into a new view controller and just use it. I want it to be testable, so if the dependencies are well-defined and it's just doing one thing, the testing becomes much easier. And all that comes together to having small view controllers, right? We have all the code in the view controllers trying to do everything. It's not testable. It's very difficult to reuse, and it's not maintainable. And for that, I wanted to have like a clear architecture where the pieces, they have like well-defined responsibilities, and the layers are small enough so they can, do all the stuff that I was talking about. And the last bit that I wanted to have is the platform-specific bits to be self-contained in a small part. So, for example, if we're doing this presenting a view controller for tvOS might be different than presenting it for macOS or for iOS. So with all that in mind, I just built a very simple demo app, and I'm going against the flow. Instead of adorable cats, I got adorable dogs. So let me show you. So I built just this simple app, which has a whole bunch of adorable dogs. This dog there, that's my dog. She's Nala. And as you can see, I got my custom transition. For example, I got my settings there. This is like a regular sort of model presentation with tons of settings that confuse people. And it manages both the scrolling. You see how it bounces back, but I can also do the interactive transition by swapping down. And I got a bit more elaborated transition, which is a push view controller. So this is a navigation controller. And when I tap on an image, it does the push, but it actually animates by zooming in. And there is also a interactive transition where I can slide down and it will start the transition and complete it if I get to the final point, or if I pass the half, or if I just let it go, it will just reverse back. So I'll show you a little bit how I built this up and how I structured all this stuff. So I was trying to find an architecture that it would work for me. I know there are a whole bunch. There is MVVM, there's RX. For me, I found that Viper works sort of good in terms that I like how it structures and separates layers. So the way I implemented this is having a wireframe, which is the one in charge of doing instantiating the view controller, and calling the ViewController.present. And I don't want, as I said, I don't want to have all the view controller doing all the networking and all this sort of stuff. So instead of doing the networking calls, it will ask a presenter to get some view models, which then we'll end up calling an interactor, which will be doing the final call to the networking service. And there will be transformations going through so that each layer has like the well-defined responsibility. So what I've done is, instead of normally in Viper, you would have the wireframe being owned by the presenter. In my case, because it's easier for me, I have the view controllers owning the wireframes. So if a view controller wants to present something, it has a injected dependency on a wireframe and just calls the show or present. So if we go into the detail of how the presentation happens, let's say we have a presenting view controller. As I was showing you there, the settings, the docs gallery. You want to present the settings. We ask the wireframe. And then the wireframe instantiates the presented view controller, and it sets itself as a transitioning delegate. It returns the animator, which is going to be doing all the animation. And because I have this interaction that I need to track, I also need to have an interaction controller, which it will allow me to attach a gesture recognizer to the view, and then it will be able to track and calculate the progress of my transition. And the way the presented view controller communicates back, say if you want to dismiss, because we know that with UIKit, you don't want to have a view controller being dismissing itself. What we do is I have this navigation delegate that it will send the call back to the wireframe, and because the wireframe knows the presenting view controller, it can just do the dismiss. So if we go into detail into each one of the pieces, the view controllers, the first thing, of course, they don't know about the view controllers they want to present or they need to present. They don't know how to instantiate it. They just know that they need to present something. And they ask about all the data they need to present on the screen. They ask it to the presenters. And the presentation happens through the wireframes. So, as I was saying, they know about a wireframe that can present a view controller or a screen, and they just say, show. And the dismissal happens through this navigation delegate pattern, which is the way of going back. And I'll show you just very quickly the code for my view controller. So this is like a very simple view controller that has a collection view. And the moment, for example, if someone taps some settings, you can see there my wireframe that it could be injected through dependency injection or just through the instantiator, the initializer, sorry, which makes it easy to test, right? Because then I can inject a mock and track that the calls happen. As you can see, there is no animation coding here. There's just the regular, the delegates, the data source delegates, which could easily be also on another class. Let's go back to the presentation. So the next part is the wireframes, and they are in charge of coordinating the presentation. By this, I mean they are in charge of saying, start the presentation, here is the animator, here is the interactive transitioning controller. And they, as I was saying before, they communicate with the presenter view controller through this navigation delegate pattern. And they also behave as transitioning delegate, which is what we need to do if we are using this custom presentation. We need to provide transitioning delegate. But they don't do any animation. There's no animation code in there, and nor any tracking of the gesture. So if I show you the code for that, just going to go through small bits and pieces. Actually, this is in GitHub. I'm going to put the link at the end of the presentation. So for example, here you can see the show settings. That's the instantiation. And it does this configure for interactive presentation, which will set itself as a transitioning delegate. Sorry? Yeah, it's like a standard function. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but yeah, you see there's not much to it. It's basically, sets itself as a transitioning delegate, and then that's the configuration for the interactive transition stuff. Oops. Let's go back to the previous one. And because we are adopting this UIKit protocol, I need to provide the slide down animated transition and then slide up, which in my case, they are slightly different. It could very well be just one if your transition is very simple, and you could be passing something that it tells whether you're presenting or dismissing. The animator is the class that it will be adopting this UI view controller animated transitioning, and it will be responsible for animating the whole presentation. And as I was explaining before, we have, in this context, the destination, the from, and the to view controllers, so we need to take them from there. And if we want to have more elaborated or more advanced presentation, say, for example, Photos app, I don't know if you've seen in detail when you drag down a photo, it actually does the presentation, starts the transition, and then it pauses until you let go and sends the photo to its original position in the collection view. In that case, we actually need to use multiple UI view property animators, which allows us to pause and advance transitions and also to set different timing curves. That could be useful, for example, if you're applying a blur effect on a background view and you want it to go faster or slower that the rest of the presentation is going. And UIKit, because they can get we can report the progress of the transition, UIKit can reverse or progress this transition. And of course, it's very important that at the end, we clean up everything. Because remember, I was telling you that UIKit removes this container view from the window. If you end up with a different state, like slightly different than the final state, you will see a jump, like in the animation. So I'll briefly show you how the animator works. So in my case, what I'm doing is I'm just defining a superclass. I tried to do it through a protocol, but because we are adopting this UI view control and animated transition in protocol, I couldn't have it as a protocol extensions. So I wanted to have these functions in there, which actually come up pretty handy. So this basically is the mandatory stuff you need to provide. Transition, the duration of the transition. You need to provide something that starts the animation. So I have something that creates my UI view property animator, and then it starts the animation. And then you also need to provide an interruptible animator, which is used in order to stop the transition. If you start going back, it will reverse the whole thing. And this is the last bit of the whole puzzle. This is when we want to have this interactive transition. So what my staff is doing is extending the UI %-driven interactive transition, which allows you to report a percentage of progress of the whole transition, which at the same time adopts the UI view control interactive transitioning. And as I was saying, you can connect the gesture recognizer with this class, and you can calculate the progress depending on how much you've moved, and then UIKit can progress or reverse the transition. And of course, we need to have something that is able to detect if you have started a transition and needs to call the dismiss on the presented view controller. And yeah, if I show you the code for that, which is actually quite straightforward. You can see here the regular, so when it gets instantiated, it will attach the gesture recognizer to the view, and I provide that view through a protocol. So the view controller, the presented view controller needs to adopt this protocol so that I can tell what's the view where you want to attach the gesture recognizer. And in my case, because I'm doing this double gesture recognizer, there is the scrolling gesture recognizer, and there is also the one that I'm attaching. I need to provide something that it will allow me to say if I can start the transition or not. For example, if I'm exceeding certain offset of the scrolling. And here it's just like the regular gesture recognizer handling. You can see here if when it begins, it starts the transition, and it asks the transition delegate to start the dismissing. And also the progress is calculated here. And we can update the progress, which is what UIKit will use to progress or reverse the transition. Something that I forgot to show, sorry, is the animation itself. So this class that, when I was explaining about the animators, this create animator just has all the logic that gets the destination view controller and the to view controller from the container, prepares everything, and eventually just creates the animation. So as usual, I had my own struggles with UIKit. So there were a whole bunch of lessons learned. So the first thing is, as I was telling you, that UIKit clones the from and the to view controller, and that's what you get in the context. If you ever try to access the IB outlets on those instances, you have crashes because they're completely invalid. So leave them alone, don't touch them. If you actually need to access to a view, you need to provide some other way, maybe through a protocol, or maybe, I don't know, using view tagging. I mean, there's no other way than going down in the view hierarchy. If you had references as IB outlets, that's not going to work. I found some issues with rotation. So, for example, if I do a model presentation, then I rotate. And then I try to start doing the dismissal. And for some reason, UIKit gives me the to view controller, which is the one that is behind, in its original old position, not the rotated position. So I always need to make sure that to force the frame of that view to the current frame, so it does all the layout, internal layout calls, and that's with the right screen. When we are providing this interactive transitioning, the moment you give it to UIKit through this transitioning delegate, UIKit will automatically start that interactive transition, whether you actually started with the finger, with the gesture recognizer or not. Which means if you hit the go back button, it will start an interactive transition and will get all confused because there's no progress being reported. So there needs to be certain logic that tracks whether an interactive transition started or not, and also that if there's no interactive transition that started, you can return just nil, so that UIKit can just use the regular progress of the animation. Always is a good idea to try to use snapshots, especially when you have complex view hierarchies, because that speeds up the whole thing. And remember that, as I was saying, this is just clone view controllers. Any manipulation you try to do on them, it's just going to go away. And also, it's very important to make sure that the initial and the final state match exactly with the original view controllers. If not, you're just going to see a jumpy animation or weird stuff. So that's all. Any questions?
Compatibility is iOS 10 Plus the same. What is the lowest iOS version compatible with?
Sorry, can
what is the lowest iOS version it is compatible with this technology?
I think I started on 7, and they gradually started adding more stuff.
It's certainly 11 plus.
No, it's not 11. I'm
10 plus.
pretty sure it's, you're talking about the iPhone or the iOS version?
iOS version.
I'm pretty sure it was 7. Yeah, it was quite, I mean, they didn't have all the UI view property animator, which is pretty cool. You can stop the animation, pause the animation, and move it, progress it, or reverse it. It was like a regular animation, and then I think on 10, they added the
So first of all, a comment, and I'd love to be proven wrong if somebody managed to make it work, but if you go and make a custom presentation controller, be warned that it only works for a full screen presentation. You cannot present and do a custom presentation over a current context. So if you try that and spend days trying to make it work, because it's a nightmare, make sure that you really want to do a full screen presentation. Just be warned. There's a radar open for like a few years and it hasn't been fixed. Second of all, I have a question. So you install a gesture recognizer on your view for the interactive transition. You install that as it starts, or is that installed anytime? Like, I'm not really understanding when the gesture recognizer is installed so that it recognizes the gesture swipe down. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so that happens the moment you provide the, when I instantiate the destination view controller, the one that I want to present, right? And I configure it for presentation, I set the wireframe as a transitioning delegate, and I configure the gesture recognizer on the view that the view controller reports.
So it's installed on presentation and is always
prior
there
to the presentation,
as long as it's there. It's always present. Okay.
Yeah, it's always there. Yeah, so that's why you need to have a bit of logic if you have a scrolling view. There needs to be a bit of logic to allow both gesture recognizers to work together. Yeah.
Hey, I was wondering, so you mentioned that you had trouble with IB outlets and manipulating view controllers when the transition is in progress, is that right?
Yep.
This doesn't exactly match the experience I had with this API particularly. Is it possible that maybe the reason why outlets weren't available is because the view wasn't loaded at that point when you were reaching them? Because I don't think the view controllers are being cloned or anything. They do move in the view hierarchy. There's like a pretty freaky process when the UI could actually, it kind of extracts the part of the view controller, the presenting view controller, and puts it in a different, the UI transitioning view, and that's the same context view, sorry, the content view, whatever it's called, that's reported by the context, and that's also where the presented view controller gets to. But those are live view controllers from what I remember.
So what I found is, I was actually trying to extract, so as you see in my collection view, I got an actual cell, and I can get the coordinates of the cell, and I need to know what's the selected cell. And every time I was trying to access, I can't remember what was the IB outlet I needed, maybe the collection view, yeah, so that I could get the coordinates. I would keep getting this crash. So I was looking and seeing what is actually referencing to. And it was actually a complete different IB outlet from another view controller. Then I started debugging and seeing the instance, the memory address, and they're actually completely different to the destination view controller. You can see if you put breakpoints once you instantiate the view controller, right, you see all the calls happening on the life cycle. If you watch the pointer of that one versus the one that you extracted from the context, is a different pointer.
It's good that you have that on open source. I'll take a look.
Thanks. Just a question on the, you mentioned you had problems with the rotation.
Yeah.
I think there was a function, I don't remember what the name of it was off the top of my head, but there was a function to call on like the view controllers to say like, wait till resize happens or something like that. Have you tried that, and did that help you with the rotation?
No, I haven't tried that. So is that when you're taking the snapshot, or?
I think when you're trying to grab the views from the view controllers to manipulate them to do the transition, you can tell them to, I guess, finish transition or finish resizing, because sometimes there's like layout stuff that's still happening. And so that's a good way to make sure that they're at their final state before you start manipulating them.
Yeah, I'll look that up. Yeah, thanks.
Just completion routine. We just the completion routine. You have completion routine when animation completed.
Yeah, this is before, at the start of the animation, to get the final, so you have the full state, or I guess your view controllers are at their, they hit the phone screen and everything, or they're at their final rotated state before you start manipulating them for the animation.
Any other question?
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll take a quick couple-minute break, and then we'll get Renaud set up with some unit tests. Ooh. And the new one's had a couple of health problems, so I think it's pretty busy with that. and just pocket, back pocket or whatever.
You don't want to touch people? Yeah, no worries. Yeah. Okay, is that turned on? Okay. Can people hear me? Is that working? Yeah, all fine? Okay, so let's go. Just airplay.
Oh yeah, airplane, sorry.
Yep. So hi, I'm Renaud. I'm a senior developer at ABD Apps, currently contracting at Latitude Financial, who is hiring tonight. So we do good stuff in both places. First of all, I want to apologize for my voice. I'm just recovering from a week-long hangover from Vlas's last day at ABD Apps, so it's been tough. It's been really rough for like a week, but I'm trying my best to get through that. After Pablo put you in orbit, I mean, that was really, really tough, but that's a really tough problem. I've wasted days of my life trying to get that working. I'm going to give you a light refreshment. It's a simple idea. It's going to be hopefully really easy to follow. And it basically has to deal with memory leaks. So I personally hate memory leaks. And I don't know about you. So first of all, I want to do a survey. How many of you test regularly for memory leaks in your applications? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, there's like 15, 20% of the room that actually raises their hand. And I don't know about you, but the way I test for memory leaks is I just regularly, like once a month, I just launch the app with instruments, testing for leaks, go through some flows, navigate, go back. Swift has memory leaks, and that's what I'm going to show actually in my talk. Like Swift has memory leaks like any other language. Java has memory leaks. Any language has memory leaks. You can abandon memory like you want. So I hate that. I test that manually. It's a bit burdensome. It can be very frustrating because after a month, finding a leak and actually finding the root of the leak can be a time-consuming job. And so I was trying to find a better way to do that. And by the way, so memory leaks can be pretty bad because obviously they don't affect your app functionally, but they're bad because you waste memory, obviously, but they decrease cache reuse, which is bad for performance. They increase the probability that your app will be jettisoned in the background because it uses more memory than it should, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really good to actually make sure that your app behaves as you expect, even though functionally it works for the user. So I'm introducing like a really simple app that I wrote, which is nothing compared to what Pablo just presented you. It's called Counter, and I'm just going to show it to you. It's a simple app with a button and a label. It's written using MVVM. It has a button and a number, and when I click the button, it increases the counter. So great. I'm ready for App Store fame, and I can ship it to the App Store. It seems like it's working fine. I can show you a bit of the code. I'm going to stop it right there. So it's not delegate, obviously. Like I said, it's using MVVM, so I've got a ViewController, very simple. There's a button, a label. When the button is tapped, I just tell the view model. I use KView observation to get changes in my view model. And that's one way to do it, but right now I'm just using KVO. So you can see very straightforward code. Here's my view model, basically the same thing. I've got a model object tied to my view model, and I just update the counter whenever the button gets tapped, etc. So it just goes through the layer and just observes the change back up. Very straightforward. The app seems to work like expected, but I go an extra mile and I write unit tests like everybody should. And I did that. So if I go in my test, I've got this exit test case, which sets up, creates a model, creates a view model, and has one test which tests that when I tap the button, it starts with 0, and I tap twice, and it goes to 1 and to 2. And I run this. And let's see, drum roll. There you go, everything is fine. It works, and it passes, so great, I can ship. I'm confident that my app works functionally, and I'm happy. But am I really? Have I tested everything in my app? And that's my point, which is that have I tested for memory leaks? And can I automate that process to make sure that my app actually frees memory that it doesn't need anymore? And one thing to do, for example, to test that something has been deallocated, one example, one solution you can use is you cannot really test that an object has been deallocated really. Like there's nothing in Foundation or the Objective-C runtime that tells you something has been deallocated. But you can indirectly observe that something has been deallocated through the use of a weak pointer, sorry. So you can point to something with a weak pointer, and if you read back that pointer and it's nil, that basically means that the object it pointed at was nil. And from that, I can basically write a little helper function in my base class, which is my test case, which is just a subclass of exit test case. So it just has a bit of customization over exit test case. And if I go in this test class, I can see what I can do, right? I can just create an array, basically, of weak pointers to objects that I want to check are deallocated at the end of my test run. So it can be done multiple ways. You can create like wrappers that wrap with generics and all of that, but in that case, I'm actually digging into archaeological stratas and basically using NS-table from Foundation, which I don't know if anybody knows, but this is a collection from Foundation that is like NSSet. It has the same function as NSSet, but it has behaviors attached to what you put in there. So you can basically say everything that goes into that set is weak, basically. You don't retain that. It is weak pointers. And that's basically what I'm doing here. I can create an NS-table of weak objects, so it doesn't retain what gets put in the set, which is great. It's perfect for this use case. So I create that var, this NS-table of weak objects, and I have this helper function, which is check for deallocation. Let's add a function where I pass an object and I say, at the end of this test run, let's make sure that this object is deallocated. And so all it does is it adds this object to that NS-table. So it goes into the set, weekly reference, everything is good. And if I then, at the end of the run, I override teardown, and I basically look at anything which is left in that collection. So anything left in that NS-table is basically still an object that is instantiated. If there's anything that still exists in there, that means it hasn't been deallocated properly, and therefore it has leaked somehow. You have a retain cycle, or maybe using manual memory management if you're crazy. But there's something that happened where this object that you expected to be allocated at the end of your test has not been deallocated. Very simple, you just iterate over the result and you look at that. So if I had that to my test, and so I'm going to add that at the end of setup, I'm going to say, by the way, set up everything, but also check for the deallocation of my view model. Because at the end of my run in teardown, I'm basically needing out the view model. And if any reference is left, really, it should be deallocated. If any reference is left to view model, then that means the NS-table will still have a reference to it. So I do this. I run the test again. And I'm running it. And here you go. It's actually failing. It's actually found something. It's actually found that if I go back to my base class, or maybe I can just look at that. Let's see. There you go. There you go.
And it tells me, like, the object, the view model, blah, 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 at this address was not deallocated. So I've automated the fact that I've got some kind of leak, some retain cycle in my view model. I modified the code maybe, and now it automatically detects you've got a problem in your logic. And I can look back at my view model and look at the code and easily find the problem here, which is obviously I'm doing an observation and I'm retaining self in my closure block in the observation. So the observation, to give you observation has the same lifetime as my object, so I can just basically say that self is unknown. And that should take care of the retain cycle. So I just introduced that fixed. I'm running the test again. And let's see if that fixed the problem. So it's running the test. There I go, it's checking that everything is deallocated. And yeah, now it passes. So I fixed that retain cycle. I don't have to find that out 1 month later. I have to spend hours trying to find out what change has made it, bisecting for like hours on end to find out exactly what made it. No, it automatically captures that. So it doesn't capture everything, it doesn't catch everything, but it captures a lot of the retain cycles you can introduce by working on your code. So it's pretty neat. So it's an idea, right? I just want to spread the idea of like, why don't you just automate and implement that kind of simple functionality to make sure that your object hierarchy doesn't leak somehow through some code path. And so, to go further, right? Like right now I'm doing a solution which is perfectly fine, but it only works really if you are guaranteed that your object hierarchy, your object graph will deallocate synchronously. You don't have any kind of, what if you use some kind of framework that actually uses dispatch async a bit too much loosely, or you've got some asynchronous process that still holds references and all of that, and you don't have determinicity. You don't know deterministically whether this object will be deallocated synchronously at the end of your test or not. So how can you work around that? Because you will have a problem here. It may not be deallocated at the end of your test. So even though this is perfectly fine, there's an even better way, which is something that will be able to deal with asynchronicity. So first of all, I want to introduce you to something which is what I call the deallocation sentinel. So it's a simple class that takes a block in its initializer, and when it gets deallocated, it just invokes this block. So basically, it's just a thing that says, hey, I've been deallocated, and I'm invoking whatever you told me to invoke when I get deallocated. It's a very simple thing that somehow is not part of Foundation, really should be part of Foundation. And I'll go back to my test case, the Swift. And I'm going to show you what it can be like now. So let's look at this now. So instead of using an NSH table of weak references to objects, instead I'm going to build XCTest expectation, which is this object that XCTest offers that basically says there's an expectation that needs to be fulfilled asynchronously at some point in time, and you can check that they are fulfilled and fail after a certain timeout if they don't actually check out. But that allows you to test asynchronous code in a very complete and deterministic manner. So I'm implementing this helper function called expect deallocation of object. So first of all, let me tell you that you can only check for leaks for reference types, therefore classes in Swift, because structs and value types have different semantics. So really, like, this should only be applied to reference types. In any case, first thing first, I'm creating, you can instantiate an XCTest expectation manually. I guess a lot of you just create it through the helper functions that XCTest case provide, but you can also instantiate it directly yourself. So I'm creating one out of thin air, giving it a description which basically talks about what object it is expecting to be deallocated. And then I'm using this funtime.h API. I guess we all dig with funtime.h, objective-c.funtime.h, anyway, which is obj_c underscore set associated object. So we are digging into the Objective-C runtime. And for those that don't know, this API, which is really low level, allows you to associate, like link an object to another object and say, I'm going to attach you to that, and you are now part of that. So it's actually a really neat way to add storage to a class you don't control. It is not recommended, it is not performant, but in some circumstances it can be really useful. And for unit tests, it's perfectly appropriate. So it is low level, like I said, and the first argument you pass is basically the object you want to attach something else to. So my object that I want to check for deallocation of. Second thing is you have to pass a unique key that you can use to later on retrieve the object if you need to. In our case, we don't really need to, but you gotta have some unique key to get a handle on that association. The third argument is basically what you want to attach to that object. So in our case, we were gonna attach the deallocation sentinel. And because we attach that deallocation sentinel to that object we want to check the allocation of, if that object deallocates, then the deallocation sentinel will also deallocate and invokes a block that says, hey, I've been deallocated. So indirectly, we know that the associated object has been deallocated. It's a bit, hopefully everybody follows, but it's very straightforward. You just indirectly seeing that an object has been deallocated because the Objective-C, unfortunately, the Objective-C runtime doesn't give you that functionality. Fourth argument is some constant that basically says, like, yes, when you associate that object, retain it, right? There's a reference here that is held between these two objects. So therefore, when one gets deallocated, this reference gets released, and therefore the object gets deallocated. Very powerful, but not recommended to use in your apps because it's actually pretty slow and all of that. But in that case, it's pretty useful. And I'm keeping track, I'm keeping reference of that exit test expectation in that array. And know that I've built this array with my tests. At the end, once again, in tear down, so let's say I can replace that, right? I don't need that anymore. I just want to use exit expectation. I can just say, you know what, you're going to wait for my array of the allocation expectations. You're going to wait for like 1 second at most. So if they get fulfilled before 1 second, it's going to go completely through. But if it 3 times out, it's going to take a second before it realizes that there's a leak or something like that. But that's totally fine because it's a failure mode. And you just write that code, right? There's only like a few lines of code. And I'm going to change that in my my tests once again. I'm going to replace that with expect the allocation of my view model. And because I fixed the problem, it should succeed because there's no problem. We already checked that there's no problem with memory leak. So yeah, that's expected. And if I reintroduce a bug, let's say somebody comes in and says, I don't know what this unknown self redoes. I'm going to remove it. And the CI system runs unit tests. And you will see that, there you go, it's going to take a second. There you go, it has failed. And we can see in the log, asynchronous wait failed, exceeded timeout of 1 second with unfulfilled expectations. We got the description of the object that was not deallocated, or at least the expectation that was not fulfilled. And so you can really track, okay, which object on my object graph didn't get deallocated. So once again, fairly simple idea. There's nothing really complex, but it's something that we've implemented at Latitude, for example. It's been really neat because it has given us confidence that as we modify the code or refactor it, we don't introduce some arbitrary return cycle. And yeah, so I just want to spread the idea of like, you know what, you can automate most of your memory leak checking rather than do some manual testing once in a while like I used to do. So yeah, hopefully you find this idea useful. That's it.
Just a quick question around using unowned versus weak. Is it preferable to use weak because if for some reason you basically self is deallocated, then it's going to crash because it's unowned. Whereas weak, it's nullified. So it's a really small nitpick.
Yeah. So we just had actually a mini debate on the Swift channel of the Melbourne CocoaHeads just an hour ago about that. But sure, you can, like, if you want to play it safe, use weak. That's totally fine. In my case, I know the life cycle of the observation block. For example, this observation block returns an NS key value observation object, which I store in an IVAR, in a property of this class. And this NS key value observation will be released on the init of that class. Therefore, the life cycle of that observation is tied to the life cycle of the object that uses it, of self. So when I see that, to me, at least my personal choice, I prefer to use unknown because it is an indication that's like, no, this is totally safe. So it is not safe at runtime in a way, but it is safe because I say it is. And I'd rather it assert if it's not. I want to know if it's not. But you can also use weak, it's totally fine. But in my case, like in that specific code, when you know exactly the code path and the way it takes, like you can say, you know what, I know. You can use unknown, but that's a bigger debate we can have. But yeah.
In this case, you know that if you want it to crash. So
yes, I'd rather crash than just say, oh, if it's new, well, let's just, you know, whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for that. I really like the concept of it for keeping this kind of thing in the front of minds of people who are working on the code base. I just have a question around, like, in a more complicated app, how do you decide which objects to put in which unit tests? Because you can't just kind of put everything in, right? You have to make a decision around what goes in and not.
Yeah.
Do you have any guidelines around that, or is that just a kind of thing where, from experience, you know what to put in? Or?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, my opinion is that anything that doesn't touch UI kit should be unit tested. And once you reach the UI kit layers, then it should probably go into an integration test or a UI test and all that. So in my case,
I don't mean like what should and shouldn't be unit tested. I mean which objects you should put in this, like, because you can't just kind of list all the objects that are instantiated, right? So
actually, I mean, as long as you use, you know, patterns like dependency injection and you don't use singletons too much, for example, right? Like, ideally, everything that is part of the test should be deallocated at the end. I mean, obviously, if you use singletons, then you know, but like, you should know your code and be able to figure out, okay, well, you should know your object graph such that you know exactly what it's testing and that all of these objects are basically ephemeral if that root object gets out. So, yeah, like, I don't have a recommendation that applies to everything, but you should know your graph so that you know exactly what needs to only leave during your test. And what I do, for example, like one of the patterns I use is that in setup, I always reinstantiate all my objects. Like you can see, right? I recreate my model from scratch. I recreate my view model from scratch. In tear down, I completely tear them down. I don't keep them around. I don't instantiate them once and then reuse them multiple times. I make sure that everything is fresh all the time, which makes that kind of test possible. So I don't know if that helps, but ideally, I think that everything should always be freed at the end of your cycle. If it's not, then something is wrong somewhere. I mean, not deeply wrong, but something maybe should be improved in the way your app is architected, because ideally everything should be an object graph.
Yeah, so what you're kind of saying is that everything that you're creating should be added to the test and made sure that it's gone. Everything that's created in the code, right? All the objects.
Yeah, to an extent, yeah.
Except the way we end up using this code is that it's almost always the view models that because they're the ones that hold the observables that have all these closures on them. And if you need to escape from that closure and grab something else from the view model, then you screw up. So the fact that this example uses a view model is very indicative of how this should be used in reality.
Yeah, no, so Matt is correct, right? So at Latitude we use Rx a lot. So functional reactive programming makes it very easy to shoot yourself in the foot by having, you know, tons of closures, return cycles, and all that. So yeah, like for us, really the view model is a critical component to test. So yeah, I can't speak for as a broader thing, but definitely at least for if you have an Rx heavy code base, test your view model, because that's where most of your logic should be, and that's where most of the risk of introducing a return cycle should be. But obviously, ViewControllers can also leak as well. So I'm sure you could write unit tests that, you know, unit tests you have ViewControllers. I don't really like them, but, you know, it's doable and do the same thing. But again, it's up to you. If you find it useful, then you can apply it to more objects. But yeah, you should be aware and aware of your object graph so that you know that everything gets delocated at the end of your run.
Fundamentally, Renaud, when your test, your tear down, you've got view model equals nil.
Mm-hmm.
You have an expectation, and you can't go exe test my model is nil because it will say yes, it works because you set the property on your test is nil. But what the expectation is that after that statement, the actual instance no longer exists. So that's where effectively that is the expectation. So part of your test is just to validate your expectation.
superclass?
Essentially making sure that no more instances of people are alive. I'll grab the mic.
And obviously, we're overriding teardown, so make sure to call teardown at the end of your override of teardown, right? Like you call setup first, super setup first, and then you set up your class, and the opposite for teardown. So you tear down your level of the hierarchy, then you call teardown of the superclass. There's an implicit ordering that has to be respected here.
Hi. Three questions.
Introduce yourself first.
Nah, who cares? 3 questions. Second question I already forgot. First question. Very neat trick with the set associated object. I wonder how well it works for purely Swift classes. I guess they're also part of the Objective-C runtime, so...
Yeah, so I almost triple checked last night, but so like I said, they behave very weirdly with value type. So if you try to associate an object on a struct, it's totally happy to do that, but what seems to happen is that they leak. They never get deallocated. So somehow in the Swift runtime, it doesn't actually work. And that can be understandable because value type doesn't really have a life cycle per se. They're values. They don't have a proper life cycle. You can't write a D in it for a struct, actually, in the first place. So the function accepts it, but after that, you can't really write it, which is why here I'm saying expect the allocation of object, any object. I force that function to only accept reference types, classes, because pure Swift classes, so in my code, they're NS objects, and it's gross, I know, but that's because of KVO. But it totally works with pure Swift classes. I tried that, so you can absolutely associate an object with a pure Swift class, and it will be deallocated, or at least released, when that associated object gets released, deallocated as well. It works.
Have you investigated why that works? As in, is that because pure Swift classes participate in Objective-C runtime as anything else?
They conform to enough of NS object protocol.
That works. Second question. I remembered it. I have just forgot it. Third question. Sorry, bad memory. Have you looked into something a bit more sophisticated and maybe even automated, like some way to even capture the list of initialized or allocated objects and then check them, they're all gone?
Absolutely. I'm sure there's more advanced things that automate the whole thing, and you don't even have to say, by the way, I want to check that. I haven't gone that far, but all I'm introducing is an IDE. Sure. Which you can do it in not too much, and yeah, you have to like write what you want to see deallocated. I'm sure you can do like some swizzling runtime, funtime.h shenanigans to really like automate that fully, and yeah, I'm sure that's possible. I haven't tried yet.
I guess
maybe one day.
The only problem that comes to mind is that if some of your object graph allocates, not just allocates memory, but also kind of caches it, then that memory stays there, and that may cause, false positives, right? Yep. That's probably why it may be problematic. I remember the second question. Have you had any problems with the auto-release pools, or is it like Arc doesn't use them at all?
Oh, very good question. I haven't thought about that, but I assume that the first solution I presented with that synchronous object of like weak references will fail because the objects haven't been released by the auto-release pool at the bottom of the stack, if there is. Whereas the second one, I don't know actually. That's a good question as well. Yeah, that's
the second one should be fine actually because you wait.
No, because the weight doesn't actually pop the stack.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Yes, that's true.
Again, it can be fixed, I'm sure, very easily. So
maybe again, I wonder if it's something worth looking into. But maybe what happens is every single test case method is wrapped into an auto-release pool itself.
Yep, maybe.
They're not. It has a fault where the main thread, which is still running underneath the.
Yeah.
The main run, which is still running underneath.
Yes, but
second would be enough to force the auto-release.
You can wrap pools. Yeah, whatever. Okay, cool, thank you.
One question. I remember Sean, when he used to program, it was a really long time ago, he used to do this, go through with, I'm thinking about an automated way to run end-to-end testing, and more like running the app and stuff. Is there a way with Xcode these days to check whether the memory has increased? You push buffer. I remember Sean doing this so often.
Yeah, no.
Sorry.
Like.
Yeah, through instruments. So this day, can you automate instrument and check? So you literally run an end-to-end testing. You observe the memory usage, and at the end, you should have a really good idea whether you're leaking or not as well.
Yeah. So.
I know you need tests are fast and good, but sometimes
I guess you could automate instruments and kind of like do all of that. There must also be ways to do this kind of logic in UI tests. So run the app automated and also instrument the app so that it checks that some of the stuff that gets instantiated in its lifetime gets allocated at the end of the run. Again, I'm just focusing on unit tests right now, and I'm sure it's possible in other places as well. It's up to you how much effort you want to put in that. I'm just showing that, at least for unit tests, it's fairly straightforward. It doesn't take too long, and you can get already like 80% there to get a lot of the leaks out. And yeah, obviously you're going to miss some, and you can get the remaining 20% by really like going the extra mile. But is it worth it? It's up to you to figure out. No.
Thanks, Shona. Are you ready, Baz? Yes. Let's go. Ate up the break time.
Do I need to go to the Wi-Fi or whatever?
It should just appear in the replay. Or just the command center thing, the top.
Let me switch off the VPN.
Yeah.
Here? Screen mirror?
Yeah. Yeah. CocoaHeads. 3, 2, 1. Yep.
Sweet.
Just in your pocket.
Thank you. We're finished. Good. Well, everyone calm down a bit. You good? Top, you ready? Good man. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Baz. I'm the chief engineer at Dropboard. And I'm going to talk about speeding up our CI a little bit, which is one of those things where I dropped a comment on Slack and Jesse wrote me in to do a talk. So basically don't ever say anything like that on Slack, otherwise Jesse will make you speak about it, which might be okay. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about our CI setup, just in case anyone is interested in how we do it. I think it's pretty standard, but people might have different ideas about what constitutes a good CI setup or not. I don't know if this is a good one. We're using Microsoft's Azure DevOps, which used to be called VSTS, and will probably be called something different next week, because they change the name frequently. And for the moment, it's Azure DevOps. We use that across all of our apps that we build, which is on the client side, we have a web app, we have a UWP app for Windows, and we have a cloud, back-end services, cloud API. All of those go through the same tooling, different build pipelines, obviously. On the iOS side, we have some links to Microsoft's App Center in there, which we were using to deploy beta builds to people. Actually don't do that anymore. And it was using Fastlane scripts to run the build pipeline. We have 4 build pipelines. We have one that runs for every PR that's going to be merged into the develop branch, which is the main branch, which is pretty standard. We run a daily QA build, 7 o'clock every morning. Spits out a build that the QAs can use if they want to. And there's like an ad hoc build using a different app ID, which I manually kick off every couple of days, or if there's like a significant piece of work has gone in to the code base, then maybe I'll kick that off. The reason I use different app ID is so that people can install that app and the live app off the App Store side by side and test both at the same time. We have a production pipeline as well for live App Store builds. All of those are basically, they're really similar. Most of the difference between them is just some configuration settings, just to turn logging on and off and things like that. That's what Azure DevOps looks like these days. Left-hand side, you create some tasks, which are mostly usually just scripts that you call into your Fastlane scripts. And the right-hand side is some options that you enter details into, for example, where to run the script, or if it's the certificates, you might provide a password, things like that. It's pretty simple. It's almost essentially like drag and drop when you know what you're building. To be honest, I've been pretty impressed by the Azure DevOps setup. It's easy. I think you can actually, I think behind this is actually a script file that you can edit as a text file as well. But to be honest, this interface is fine, and it works really well. And I've actually found the whole thing to be really stable. Like, it never goes down, it works pretty well. From the GitHub side of things, we have, obviously GitHub kicks this off every time you do a PR. You require a review for the PR, and it requires that the CI setup passes each time. That's done by these rules. You can't really see that probably very well. Basically, it has to pass CI in order for a PR to get merged. So, starting point, from when I joined the company, we already had all this pretty much up and running. Build time is about 15 minutes, which is okay. It's not terrible. It's actually fairly fast. I've seen a lot worse than that. There you go, 15 minutes at the top. Most of the things, ooh, I didn't know that was going to happen. That's pretty cool. Pretty much everything takes like seconds. Installing certificates and spinning up the container to run it and all that, there's nothing we can really do about that. It's all fast. And obviously the Xcode build and test times, you can optimize those a little bit, but not hugely that it makes that much of a difference. This one here, the Bootstrap script, had been bugging me for months. And I just never got around to doing anything about it. I'm like, it's taking a while every time. It seems too long. But I can't be bothered having a look to see what's going on there. I'll just leave it. It's okay. It doesn't fail, therefore it's fine. So what was that script doing? It was installing Brew and Rbenv, installing the required Ruby version that we'd specified in our .ruby version file, doing a git submodule update, installing Yarn, doing a Yarn bundle, bundling the gems that were required, doing a pod install for some reason, even though the pods are checked in. Running through all that took obviously 5-6 minutes every time, and it's just unnecessary and probably environmentally unfriendly as well. So there was the great purge of 2019, where we removed all of the legacy iOS code. So for a bit of context, basically this app is essentially being rewritten completely from version 1 to version 2. well, not pretty much, 100% of the old code in the app is now gone. It was deleted. Part of that was a couple of React Native screens that were in there. As part of that, I wanted to simplify the pod file. Now, a lot of that stuff was required because removing React Native meant we no longer needed to import a whole bunch of pods that React Native needed. So at the same time, I'm like, okay, why not, if I'm going to be deleting a whole bunch of stuff anyway, use that as an opportunity to revise the build script at the same time. Because we no longer needed a whole bunch of that stuff. We didn't need the yarn stuff. We didn't need a whole bunch of the pods that React Native used. So I had to go in and change the file anyway, so I may as well make it a bit streamlined as much as I can. That's what the PR looked like, minus 1.5 million lines of code, right? That's what happens when you remove React Native from a project. It's nuts, like it's completely ridiculous. Because I look at that and I go, well, that's 1.5 million lines of code that can't cause a bug anymore. Fantastic, right? That's obviously a good thing. And the other good thing about this is I will never, no matter how much code I write in this job, I will never be net positive in code contribution to this project. I just can't do it.
Until you add React Native back.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the next thing, whatever the next great silver bullet is. Yeah. So I changed the Bootstrap script. I started to change it with a mindset of let's keep it as close to the current script as possible. But then I realized that the current script was kind of written for humans. It was written for spinning up a new laptop. Like a new developer comes on, they need a new install of the project. So they need all this stuff. But actually, CI isn't the same situation as that. It doesn't need to run the same script, which is really obvious, actually, but for some reason, it didn't occur to me until a couple of days into it. So I split the scripts and made CI run a different script from humans. So the human script is still, I mean, it doesn't have all the yarn and all that, but it's still more extensive than the script that runs for CI. I decided to not reinstall Ruby every time because the container that Azure DevOps spins up has Ruby. I don't need to be that strict about exactly which version of Ruby I use. I can just use whatever the container uses. And if that means that a developer needs to keep a version of Ruby on the machine, fine, no big deal. So essentially the new script, it runs an Xcode select just to make sure the right version of Xcode is available, which is really a fast lane, like an upload thing to make sure the fast lane can actually upload using the right version of Xcode to the App Store. And it does a bundle install to make sure that the versions of Fastlane and something else I can't remember are correct. So it's pretty, it doesn't do much anymore. Yeah, Fastlane. Yeah. I don't love Fastlane. I find it very confusing. I find the naming of the things really bizarre. Like what's gym supposed to mean and all that. Like, I don't know. So I thought, okay, I'll try and not use Fastlane at all. Because the various tasks that Azure DevOps gives you cover all of the things that Fastlane does. But when I ran those, it turns out they just call Fastlane. They just call a version of Fastlane that's installed in the container already. So I thought, well, if it's going to call Fastlane anyway, I may as well be in control of the version of Fastlane and what we're doing with it in our own fast file. So I just went back to using our own fast file. I simplified it a little bit, but basically we just used that, pretty much the same fast file that was there before. I took out pushing builds to App Center because we used to use that to deploy beta builds to users. We now do that through test flight, so I got rid of all that, which meant there was kind of like one less step. It used to send builds to App Center, and then they would send, that would send the builds to Apple. No point in doing that, may as well just send it straight to test flight. So total build time went down about 6 minutes, which is good. Thank you, very impressive. The bootstrap time is like seconds, which is fine. I mean, most of that build time now, or the majority of it is the actual Xcode build and a little bit of running tests. I don't think I can make it any faster. So, was it worth it? I mean, it was like maybe this was like a day's work, you know, like a spread over a few days, a couple of hours here and there, but it was maybe like a solid day's work. It's faster, obviously, so that's good. But I think the most useful thing is it's much, much simpler. There's so fewer moving parts now that it's much more understandable for people. It's a little bit more brittle because it's using what's supplied by the container. So that'll break when Microsoft decide to update the container. Probably, like, I'm imagining WWDC time, and it'll get a bit hairy because things will start to break as Microsoft push things into the container, or in September. But it's simple enough now that that's okay. I think it'll be easily fixable. Like, it might break for a couple of builds. It'll take it, you know, an hour later it'll be fixed. And I still miss Buddy Build because that was really easy. I wish I could just use that again. So here's hoping for WWDC this year. So in short, maybe your scripts are doing stuff you don't need. It's worth checking. Just have a look every now and again, chip away at it. Don't just, I spent a long time like I'm not touching it. I don't fully understand what this does. I'm just going to leave it. It's working. But every now and again, maybe just have a look and say, is this working optimally? Chip away, simplify things. I mean, that's pretty much what I say every day to people. Just simplify, simplify, simplify. It always makes life easier. That's it. Thank you.
Let's use the mic. They're good questions. We'll start down there and come back.
Hey, love the presentation, especially about coming from a back-end background, like seeing build times reduce is always a satisfying feeling.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So I guess one question I had was, so I noticed that you said the developers and the build machines and the CI are using different versions of in terms of the environment. Like, have you found that have you run into any problems of there being a difference between those two, considering?
Not really, because the developers never, you're not really doing the same thing. Like, the developers never run Fastlane scripts locally. Like, it's not, you know, you don't ever really have to do it. So it never really, I haven't seen it cause a problem. And also, every setup script that I've ever seen doesn't work when the next developer comes along and tries to run it anyway. So they're kind of not that useful. Like, we have this great idea that you have a bootstrap script that the next developer can run and it'll just make everything work fine. And it never does, because the developer's already installed RVM on the machine and it's screwed up the rubies or whatever. And like, it just never really works out like that.
I'll go here to sit that, and then maybe you have one support your Renault. Yes. I was going to ask about running sort of test cases before you merge your pull request. It seems like if you did that would increase the delta. So obviously, are you running the test? Like, are you running the unit?
Yeah, it runs tests every time.
So
test taker.
That timing, so 6 minutes. That's
yeah, that includes the test. So I think the build takes like 3 to 4 minutes, and the tests take 2 to 3 minutes, usually.
And the second question was, you mentioned that you got rid of App Center, but say if you had a pre-prod or QA environment and then you had a production environment, ideally you would want to sort of build something against deployed App Center that points to pre-prod. Because once you push it out to test file, usually it's production environment.
Yeah. So the way exactly. The way we deal with that is to have there's actually you like tap on the logo in the login screen 10 times and it opens up a preferences pane that allows you to switch environments. So that's how you get into the test and pre-prod environments and things like that. So it's not different builds, it's the live build, but with kind of hidden settings essentially.
Right, so when you absolutely just kind of hide that setting.
Yeah, and actually that'd be, I should say that in TIL. There's an interesting thing. Someone did a little snippet of code that detects test flight builds. So it does that. It detects if it's a test flight build and allows you to access those settings. And if it's not a test flight build, then you can't access those settings. Previously, we did it with a password, but this code has got around that.
I think you may have answered that already on Slack, but have you tried disabling indexing while building on your CI agent?
Yes.
And what was the result?
Like like a couple of seconds saved. Yeah, it didn't really make much difference. Yeah.
So I think thanks a lot for sharing your experience and stuff. I think it's very important to always spend some time to optimize the developer workflow or happiness. I think it's really great. There's one thing, it applies to web as well. So there's one thing that Azure is missing from their pipelines is the ability to set cache. So if you were to set your node module like you had there, a million stuff, if you were able to set a cache and pull a cache, you'll speed up your builds. Like other CI systems have it. They started working on it last month, but it will speed up stuff. Same as you don't have to reinstall Ruby, etc. It will just take your Docker and stuff. Yeah, and some people don't spend the time creating their own Docker image for things. It's more like for the web.
Yeah. Actually, I should have asked the web guys how they find it and how their builds go, because I honestly haven't even looked at how their pipelines or how long they take. I know we had some problems when the web developers were using what's called the CI thing that's made in Melbourne, BuildKite. They were using that, and then they moved to Azure, and they just choked our pipelines for like a couple of days, and because their builds were, and also the way they were running builds was on every commit, I think it was, and they were just generating a lot of builds, and they were relatively slow, I think, so they ended up choking our pipeline. We just paid for more concurrent users. So yeah, I think that's a good point actually. I'll ask them tomorrow and see how theirs work for that, because I think theirs are relatively slow. Yeah.
And so, would you recommend Microsoft Azure for those pipeline stuff?
Yeah, I found it good actually. Yeah, I haven't had a problem with it at all. It's been really stable and it's easy to use. We used BuildKite at AKNX, and that was really good. And Buddy Build, I really like obviously.
Because it's the only service that does hosted OS 10 build. I'm going to do everything like Bitrise and everything. That is super slow.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit more. You've got to. It's not as like all-encompassing as Buddy Build or whatever. Like you've got to do some setup to make it work. But once you've set it up, it's pretty good. Yep. Oh.
Hi. It's fascinating how fast can you go by just doing less, or writing your whole code base.
Was that something? Go again.
It's fascinating how fast you can go by doing less.
Yeah.
Or rewriting your whole code base.
Well, if you remove 1.5 million lines of code, you would think things would go faster?
Maybe.
Should be.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
How do I stop this?
Stop
Oh, tough.
Yeah.
Is there a way to stop it from iOS? Do you have to do it?
Thank you.
I think it's good timing. Baz, your comment there around Fastlane, I've kind of been feeling that as well. And a client requirement at work to do a similar setup to you, where we had one app that we wanted to distribute multiple times. So it had a UAT, production, dev, and then we were submitting it to App Center and to Test Flight. So we sort of had, and then the client requirements changed, and now we're building 2 apps out of the same code base, so that just doubled. So the poor CI has to sit there and do like 4 things at once. Anyway, we ran out of Bitrise. Bitrise's maximum build time was 45 minutes. We were running over that. So, okay, coming from a different base to you, but we had to solve that problem.
Which was exactly this. It was like some guy pulling back from Fastlane because it was actually doing way more than what he could do with X.
So I've got a little bit of, so my issue was, I feel like maybe there's something happening right now in the industry, and I've been feeling it for a while. one build, multiple exports was my problem. So running the build 4 times in one pipeline was just too slow, and Bitrise is slow anyway. Most people just gem install Fastlane, and they use fast files, and they have all their stuff basically sitting there in some Ruby version that, some Ruby file that they don't really understand that they're writing Ruby. It's just a DSL for Xcode build, in my opinion. I'll prefix everything I'm saying before the end rant slide with "it's my opinion." We've gone through, so at Domestic Cat, we do lots of different client apps, so each project is slightly different. Some go out via enterprise, some hit the App Store, some go to App Center. Everything's different. So we're sitting there wrestling with Fastlane most of the time. It's like, okay, some requirement comes in to submit a UAT build or something else to test flight, or this and that. I found that most of the time you spend in the Fastlane documentation trying to work out what the action is to do a thing that is essentially just a wrapper around Xcode build. You're sitting there trying to work out what the code signing error is. The code signing error is just bubbled up from Xcode build, so why not learn how Xcode build works? So Xcode build and how it works is actually divided awkwardly across 2 methods, 2 things. You run man Xcode build, and that gives you the manual file, and that is an epic file. I don't know if I can get to it. It's probably a good screensaver. So Xcode build, that's a different one. So it's epic. It's all your options. It's all here. It's overwhelming. Overwhelming is the word. That's why I think a lot of people haven't bothered to sort of go through it. Inside Xcode build, when you get into that kind of nitty-gritty of how to code sign something, which I think is also what most of us spend most of our time dealing with, you've got to go to Xcode build help, and you've got to read about the export options plist. I'll get to that in a second. This is Xcode build. This is a normal project. If you've got your project set up with a scheme and a configuration, so a simple configuration is debug or release. If you're doing different things, I've changed my opinion of this over the last year or so in the same mindset as this. Use different configurations. So if you've got a UAT release and you've got a production release, just use 2 configurations. So for example, you've got your scheme. Sorry? Yeah, well, if your dependencies don't have the same named configuration, it defaults to release, which is the reason why I haven't used it previously. CocoaPods seems to get in the way and create all those intermediate configurations for you. I also don't like CocoaPods, but in that case, it's good. Set up your workspace, set up your scheme. This is like an example shell script. I pulled it directly out of the shell script I wrote for this project. Set up your workspace, set up your scheme. The archive path, you can make that up. It doesn't have to be .archive, it can be anything. But that's what I've called it. And then the dsims path is always /dsims inside the archive. And then you run Xcode build. Scheme, archive path, archive, and then if you want to add your own Xcode arguments into the command line, you just put them on the end, which is great for CI if you've got a build number or something like that. I'm not going into Xcode XC arguments, XC configs, but that's the gist. Workspace, scheme, archive path, archive. Then you end up with an Xcode archive on your machine. I'm ignoring code signing for the minute. I think there is a default, yes. It ends up inside the developer directory somewhere. But if you want to control it for subsequent requests, it's much easier to just tell it where to go. Yep. All right, so say I want to take this and I want to export it via ad hoc code sign it via ad hoc distribution, which is great for non-enterprise stuff up to App Center or whatever. Couple more variables. I've got my export path for the ad hoc. I've got my ad hoc export options plist. Then I just run Xcode build, export archive, archive path, blah, 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 those 3 things. Then you can find the IPA file it generates with this fancy script, which is just find the name with star.ipa, given your other variables. Bang, now you've got an IPA. Again, assuming you've got the code signing details installed. Now, the trick to understanding how Xcode archive, export, whatever it is, this one, export archive works is actually not in the manual for Xcode build, it's in the help for Xcode build underneath the export options plist distributing archives. And it actually is mentioned in the man file. It says, blah, 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 go and look at Xcode build help. So if it wasn't already complex enough and you're sitting there and you're going blurry, you end up here and you're like, ugh. Now that's how I had been the last, mind you, Xcode build has improved over the years, so I can't say that, you know, we've all been ignorant for the last 10 years. It's got better in the last couple of episodes of Xcode. So that's from the man file, and then we're going to end up, well, from there, I'll go back to my terminal here, and then you go into Xcode build help, and it's just another, it's this. Like, and this is all about, this is the most important thing, is how the export options plist works. If you read it top to bottom, it doesn't make any sense. So what I did on this, through this exploration is, I'm like, okay, I'm going to order all of these bits here that it's talking about in the context of how like in the context of what they do. So for example, compile bitcode is for non-App Store exports. Like, all right, I'm going to group all the things that are for non-App Store exports underneath the same headings. And all of a sudden, I swear, it started to make sense. Here we go. So generic settings, these apply to everything. The method that you would put in an export options plist is either App Store, validation, ad hoc package, and defaults to development. That's all it needs to say. It says this whole paragraph of things. Signing style is manual or automatic. Defaults to automatic if your export was automatic. Team ID is your portal team. For non-App Store exports, all you care about is whether you compile bitcode or not, and that defaults to yes, so you don't really care about it. And whether you want thinning, defaults to none, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. And then App Store exports, upload bitcode, upload symbols. So they default to yes. Then it's provisioning profiles. If you go from this general settings, if you set the signing style to manual, which inadvertently you are doing when you export it yourself, you have to set the provisioning profiles key in your export options plist. That's your bundle identifier, and that's the UUID of the provisioning profile installed on your system. If you've got those set up, most of what Fastlane does is generate this file on the fly and then just pipe it into Xcode build or Xcode archive. That's a key component. That actually would be better documentation than what they wrote. Signing certificate, there's too much information here, but this is where that iOS distribution, iOS developer thing kind of comes out. You can also provide that specifically, but most of the time it can work that out. It defaults to, what does it say it defaults to? Based on the distribution, it kind of works that out most of the time. So here is an example, sorry it's a little bit small, but here's an example of the bare minimum plist you need to take that exported archive and end up with a build, an ad hoc build or an App Store build. So destination is export. That's actually the default anyway. Generate App Store information, false. Method App Store, provisioning profiles, there's that key again. Signing style manual, strip Swift symbols, I think that defaults are true. There's your team ID, upload bitcode, upload symbols. That's all you need. Say I want to export to the App Store. It's the same code I showed before, but with a different export options plist. So you can actually differentiate between how you code sign your app based on that plist that you've got there. This isn't a completely exhaustive version of how to do all this, but the point is it's the same thing between App Store and ad hoc. Then I'm like, okay, can I get rid of the upload to App Store thing? I trawled through the new iTunes Connect API that is meant to exist. The only thing it doesn't do is upload things. That's in some other set of documentation that's not referenced in Xcode build help or man Xcode build. It's in some other thing. It's called ITMS transporter. It has existed forever. You can pick it. It's part of Xcode build. So it's part of the application loader app. You can see it. You sort of generate the transporter home thing here. if you read its documentation, it tells you what to do. You can take the IPA file you generated, you give it a couple of other variables, a couple of environment variables, and it'll just upload it to test flight. That's it. So the whole script that we took, that was all this fast lane configuration and backwards this and that, we replaced with a couple of different configurations. And apart from assigning the variables from the CI, we're using Bitrise, assigning variables to local things. It's like 4 commands that you have to kind of work out how to read. And I felt that the key was taking that export options plist and kind of putting it in the right order. So I guess what I'm getting at is not to be harsh, but tools like Fastlane and those things, someone who's just gone and read the documentation and wrapped it in Ruby, whereas really it's not that complicated, especially in 2019. These tools are actually really close. So you can, in a simple case, which I think, especially if you're in a position where you're a product company or you've got your own products and it's just sort of 1 or 2, a shell script to go from building, running the tests, and uploading to test flight is pretty straightforward. I think fundamentally, and again, back to my opinion, I think fundamentally, like, I spent a lot of time writing iOS apps and distributing iOS apps. It actually wasn't that difficult. It only took probably took a day. I spent like a whole day once that day. Like, I was determined to get it right. But once you dig into the documentation, it's not too bad. Not anymore. I think when Fastlane came on the scene, all of this wasn't quite as like handy. Now it's got a lot better. So that's my, I hope that spurs some interest in going to man Xcode build. ASC provider is, if you go to the documentation for ITMS transporter, you can log in with your details and it gives you the ITMS, the ASC provider. It's like your team ID sort of thing. It's pretty similar. It wasn't too hard to find. Yep, that's it. App Store Connect. That's all I've got for this one. Any questions?
Can you put this in the post, please?
Yes. I mean to type it up. I've got a gist where I took the. Am I on the internet? So my effort so far, I've got a gist where I've reorganized the Xcode build help, and I've annotated it further. And honestly, I refer to that all the time. So it's like, here's where it goes. Super handy. But yes, it needs to be in some other format.
Not a question, but a comment. There's a bunch of quick look developer plugins for the binder that will give you, like, you can quick look at IPA, you can quick look at provisioning profiles, things like that. They're super useful because you can just go spacebar and you can do all info that you'll ever need. And there's the only thing you need then is a binder terminal command, you'll be able to look it up, that will allow you to copy and paste out of the quick settings. So you can copy your provisioning profile ID data.
So hit spacebar and then you can copy it. Yeah.
So you need those two things that makes it a whole lot easier.
Yep.
Yep.
Jesse, I might be a little bit slow, but so just going back to your original problem, you were sort of saying that your Fastlane setup was such that you were building from scratch 4 different times, was it, to get 4 different artifacts?
Yes. Yep.
And so you're saying that the benefit here is that you build once, but then you export the archive in different formats.
Correct.
Right. So do you think that's a case of where, does Fastlane not support exporting at all, or so it forces you to build from scratch, or is it just that you didn't know that was a possibility in Fastlane?
I was at this turning point where my whole Fastlane setup, I was just running it 4 times and doing 4 builds. I'm like, I need to work out how to get Fastlane to export from the previous build.
So you could either learn how Fastlane was doing what it was doing, or you could figure Fastlane out to try and get it to wrangle. So the blog post I just posted into the Slack basically says exactly that as well. But I think this is a case of like any kind of third-party library that is intended to make your life easier. It's great, you could be lazy, but then at some point you know, it actually benefits you to understand the underlying thing, and it might be 3 lines of code for what you need versus porting a whole massive, React Native library or a Ruby environment to do your builds.
If your build system runs on React Native, I'd love to hear it.
And I haven't developed since probably about 2013, and this is just taking me right back to the good old days.
I was also on the topic of going, re-exporting things and recode signing things. Inside the Fastlane GitHub repo, inside the source code for Fastlane, is this amazing shell script called resign.sh that is basically fully documented, obviously well tested, and it's the shell script that Fastlane calls internally to do all of its recode signing. I'm like, just use that. But yeah, maybe Fastlane is becoming the kind of JSON parsing library of 2019, or maybe it's the sort of the unnecessary constraint abstraction that we don't need anymore because the APIs under the hood are getting a little bit more. But a rewrite of the Xcode build manual file and a rewrite of the Xcode build help file would actually make this much better. Oh yeah, so our builds were like 15 minutes times 4, so that was, not going to work, so now it's 15 minutes times 2.
Do you think you will save 45 minutes loading
How much it took you to set up all the scripts?
Not long, not long. Once reading the documentation, understanding like what I needed to do, no, not long at all. Super simple, just deciding on the paths and this and that. Very straightforward. Cool. I'm conveniently already up here. That's better. No. It's the 19th. I think the dates in these slides are representative of my mindset leading up to the CocoaHeads. I changed the date. I changed the month, but not the date. It's next week. 20th. The 20th. Next Wednesday. Drinks night, March 26th. That looks right. And then NS Breakfast, put a hold on NS Breakfast for the moment. How was Drinks night at the Imperial the other week? Really good. Yeah, it looked good. The photo looked good. That's up on the rooftop. Oh. It's CocoaHeads guys and Harry Potter nerds. Okay. There's probably an overlap. Ugh. Next meetup is not tonight. Next meetup is the second Thursday of next month, whatever that is. I need a template that doesn't have the dates in it. Anyway, that was correct last month. We're back here next second Thursday of next month. The May event has been shifted forward one day. It's on a Wednesday. So if you normally don't like Thursdays, Wednesday in May could be cool. It's April 11th? Thank you. Thanks for coming. If you've got any bottles under your chair, just take them towards the back. Probably a group of us will head down to the Irish Times. See you next month. Thanks for coming. Cheers.